Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, well, we are very pleased to have Nayantara Bhatnagar. I probably mispronounced it anyway, but anyway, Nayantara here, and she's going to be talking about some work on Monte Carlo Markov chains.
Thank you. So, thanks for coming. The title of my talk is Enhancing the Markov Chain Monte Carlo Method. I'm going to be talking about approximate counting problems. These arise from many different areas and are studied in theoretical CS. For example, matchings, colorings, independent sets are studied in combinatorics. Partition functions of the Ising model or in the Potts model are studied in statistical physics, and there are natural problems that come up in geometry, like approximating the volume of a convex body. So how do we obtain algorithms for these problems? Well, one way is through this nice connection of Jerome, Valiant, and Vazirani, who showed that for self-reducible problems, which includes most of the problems above, if you can randomly generate samples, then in fact you can approximately count. So we've reduced the problem of approximate counting to random generation. Now, a very popular method for random generation is the Markov Chain Monte Carlo method. And for the problems that we looked at, often a very natural Markov chain suggests itself. So for matchings, there's Broder's Markov chain, which walks around on the set of matchings. For colorings, independent sets, and the Ising model, there's a natural notion of single-site dynamics or Glauber dynamics. For volume, for randomly generating points in a convex body, a natural notion is to take a walk on lattice points. And over the years, many techniques have been developed to bound the convergence time of these Markov chains. But in this talk, I'll try to focus on the following question. What happens if there's a problem that you really are interested in solving, but the natural Markov chain is in fact slow? Okay, so I like to think of the answer to this question maybe as trying to think of meta algorithms. So one of the algorithms is simulated annealing and its variant simulated tempering, which is used for sampling. And the idea of these algorithms is the following. So there's some hard distribution here at the top that we're interested in sampling from or finding the optimum in. And bottlenecks in the distribution cause the convergence of the algorithm to be slow, to not converge. So the idea of annealing is to start instead at a distribution which we can easily sample from. Okay, for which finding the optima are easy. And we gradually morph this distribution into the distribution that we're interested in sampling from. And it's up to us to decide how to define these interpolating distributions. And the hope is that by taking a random walk in this set of distributions, you can avoid the bottlenecks which cause the convergence to be slow otherwise. So in terms of random sampling, we're attempting to bypass these bottlenecks, but also from the point of view of counting algorithms, you can think of these algorithms as using the simple Markov chain as a subroutine with something more sophisticated on top of it. So these kind of ideas have been successful previously, for example, in showing faster algorithms for volume of a convex body, as well as in the approximation of the permanent. But there's no magic recipe. It's not always clear how to apply annealing. And so we'd like to know when do these ideas work and how to apply them. So I'm going to talk about two results on on this theme. One is an annealing algorithm for binary contingency tables, which are essentially bipartite graphs with a prescribed degree sequence. This was joint work with Bezakova and Vigoda. And one of the key features of the annealing algorithm that we defined was that we had to define the starting easy instance carefully. So the starting easy distribution that I showed you in the previous slide had to be defined rather carefully. On the flip side, I'll talk a little bit about a result on simulated tempering, where we showed that, in fact, for the Potts model, the algorithm will not converge quickly. And if the interpolating distributions are defined so that they vary only with a temperature parameter, then in fact tempering cannot succeed. So let me start with the annealing algorithm. So this is a binary contingency table. You can think of it as an occurrence matrix of, in this case, species of birds on islands in the Galapagos. And these kind of tables were studied in statistics, for example, to test evolutionary hypotheses. If you could count the number of such tables, then you could say something about whether the distribution of birds on islands was just a product of chance, or whether evolution was possibly running the distribution that you observed. So
you do that research in Georgia, huh?
Well, Darwin started it. So I'm going to be thinking of binary contingency tables as bipartite graphs with a prescribed degree sequence. So our problem is to generate a random bipartite graph of this type. So in previous work, Jerome Sinclair, Kanant Titali Vempala, and Cooper Dyer Greenhill showed that if the degree sequence was regular, so all the required degrees were the same, then in fact Markov Chain Monte Carlo approach works. And recently Blanchette showed that an algorithm called importance sampling works for regular degree sequences. And that approach tends to be faster than the Markov Chain Monte Carlo approach. The problem was solved by the paper of Jerome Sinclair and Vigoda on approximating the permanent, because in fact you can reduce the problem of counting these binary contingency tables to the problem of approximating the number of perfect matchings in a graph. However, in this reduction, there's an increase in the size of the instance. And moreover, one of our motivations for looking at this problem was to try to see whether we could analyze a simple Markov chain on the set of contingency tables. So we end up giving an annealing algorithm for this problem. It saves somewhat on the time because we don't go through the reduction to permanent. So we get something like end of the 11th in the worst case. But as I mentioned before, an interesting feature is that the annealing itself had to be defined carefully. Our algorithm also extends to the problem of tables with cell bounds. So that is the following problem. I'm given a bipartite graph G and some degree sequence, and now I want to generate a random subgraph of this graph with the given degree sequence. And our main result is an approximately uniform generator for generating these subgraphs. So I'm going to describe first a simple Markov chain on the set of binary contingency tables. So the state space of the Markov chain contains the set of what I'll call perfect tables, which is bipartite graphs which satisfy the degree sequence. We also augment the space by near-perfect tables. So a near-perfect table is a bipartite graph which satisfies the degree sequence, except it has two deficiencies at two designated vertices. So the set of graphs NUV is these graphs which satisfy the deficient degree sequence. Now the moves of the Markov chain are as follows. We can pick an edge and delete it, or add it in and move between perfect and near-perfect tables. Okay?
The deficient just means it's one short of what it should be?
Yes, it's exactly one short. And the other type of move moves between near-perfect tables. So for the near-perfect table on the left, we pick a vertex y and delete this edge xy, which is adjacent to it, and add in this edge. And this has the effect of moving the deficiency around in this bipartition. Okay? And you can show that this converges to the uniform distribution on the set of perfect and near-perfect tables. Okay? So Jerem and Sinclair showed that for degree sequences where the number of near-perfect tables is at most a polynomial times the number of perfect tables, in fact, this Markov chain will converge in polynomial time. And therefore, because this condition is satisfied, polynomial fraction of the time we'll be able to see perfect tables. And this gives us a sampler. Unfortunately, it's easy to come up with degree sequences where this condition is not satisfied. For example, for the sequence on the left, you can verify that there's exactly one perfect table. But if I put deficiencies at the highest degree vertices, then in fact there will be exponentially many tables. So not only are we not guaranteed that the Markov chain will converge, but even if it did, because the number of near-perfect tables is so large, we wouldn't even be able to end at a perfect table a significant fraction of the time. So here's a solution to this problem. The stationary weight of the near-perfect tables is very large. So let's try to scale it down. Okay? So for a graph G, which is perfect, we define its weight to be 1. And for a graph G, which is near-perfect with deficiencies at U and V, its weight is defined to be the ratio of the number of perfect tables to the number of near-perfect tables. And here I've reused the notation for sets just to keep things cleaner later. And should be obvious what I'm referring to. Now with these weights in hand, what we can do is redefine the transitions of the Markov chain I described earlier so that the stationary distribution actually converges, so the stationary distribution is proportional to these weights over the graphs. Okay? And these weights were carefully chosen so that in the stationary distribution, the stationary probability of the near-perfect matchings is exactly equal to the stationary probability of the perfect matchings. And since there are at most n squared possible vertices u and v, which can have deficiencies, if this chain were to converge, we would end at a perfect table a polynomial fraction of the time. Okay? And this would give us a sampler. And in fact, we can show that the Markov chain defined with respect to these weights mixes in polynomial time. Here, capital D is the number of edges in the graph. So if I fix the degree sequences, then the number of edges in a graph is fixed, and that's D. D max is the maximum degree in the graph. So in this talk, I won't be focusing on this result. Instead, I want to focus on the following problem. Notice that we define these weights in terms of the very quantities that we're trying to estimate. Okay, so it's not even, so how do we compute these weights? The surprising answer is that there is a method for computing these weights, and this is where the annealing comes in. Okay? So let's think of the more general problem, which is that we're given a complete bipartite graph, and we wish to count the number of subgraphs with a given degree sequence. Okay? So here's the idea of annealing. Let's try to solve this problem on some easy instance, which is a graph called G-easy. Okay? By solving the problem, I'll make that more precise later, but for example, it could mean a graph G where you can count the number of subgraphs with a given degree sequence. Okay? And we'll gradually change this easy graph into the complete bipartite graph, recomputing the number of subgraphs in each iteration, and hope that the solution changes by a bounded amount in each iteration. I'll make this all precise later, but this is sort of the high-level idea of annealing. So the idea of annealing came from the algorithm for approximating the number of perfect matchings. So in that case, we have an input graph G, and we wish to approximate the number of perfect matchings of that graph. And the idea of the annealing there is to start at the complete bipartite graph, for which the number of perfect matchings is known exactly. It's just n factorial. Okay? And we gradually change the graph in some way so that we end up at the input graph. And in each step, we recompute the number of perfect matchings. Okay, so roughly that's what goes on. So the question in our case is, what do we mean by an easy instance for this problem? So to make this precise, let's look at the following. So let's fix the bipartite graph G easy, and we're going to weight the edges. So every edge which is in G easy has a weight of 1, and every edge of the complete bipartite graph, so it's a non-edge of G easy, has a weight of lambda. And lambda is a parameter which will vary between 0 and 1. Okay? Now, for any bipartite graph H, we let the weight of H be the product over the weight of its edges. Okay? So for example, what is the weight of the graph G easy? It's just 1. Okay? Because every edge in G easy has a weight of 1. Right? And moreover, notice that for any graph, its weight is some polynomial it's a monomial in lambda, where the power is the number of non-edges of G easy which it contains. Okay? So is this weighting clear? Because this is going to be a little important. Okay. So
but this is for a fixed G-easy.
Correct.
Right, and I guess
It's
you say that's
yes.
the first word, fixed. Okay.
yes, right. So now let's look at two polynomials which will have useful properties for us. The first is the perfect table polynomial. The perfect table polynomial is the sum of weights of graphs which have the degree sequence that we require. So take every graph which has degrees RC, the input sequence, look at its weight, and just sum them up. Okay? So let's look at a particular coefficient. Let's look at the coefficient of the term lambda to the I. Okay? So this corresponds to the number of graphs H which have the degree sequence R and C, and their weight is lambda to the I. Okay? Because we said earlier that the weight of every graph is just a monomial. Okay? Similarly, analogously, we can define a near-perfect table polynomial. So let RU and CV be the degree sequences where we have deficiencies at U and V. Okay? And now we perform the same operation. We sum up the weights of graphs which have the degree sequence RU and CV. Okay? And therefore, the coefficient of the term lambda to the I will be the number of such graphs which have exactly I non-edges of G easy. Okay? So why are we looking at these polynomials? Well, they have some nice properties. Consider what happens when we evaluate at lambda equals 1. Okay? In this case, the polynomials just evaluate to their sums. And this, by definition, is the number of perfect tables, and in the case of the first polynomial, and the number of near-perfect tables with deficiencies at U and V in the second case. Okay? At the other extreme, when lambda is 0, what do the polynomials evaluate to? Well, they evaluate to just the constant term, because everything else will drop out. And the constant term corresponds to graphs which have no non-edges of G easy. In other words, they're subgraphs of G easy. Okay? Now remember what we said for the idea of annealing was that we'll start at one extreme where we can compute the number of subgraphs and end with the complete graph. So what is a candidate for a graph G easy such that we can compute these values explicitly? Well, one possibility is a bipartite graph with the degrees R and C. Okay? So I claim that when lambda is equal to 0, the number of subgraphs of a graph which has degrees R and C, okay, with degrees R and C is exactly 1, the graph itself. Okay? On the other hand, let's look at the polynomial NUV of lambda. I claim that in this case, the number of subgraphs with the deficient degree sequence is either 1 or 0. If the edge UV is present, then it's 1, okay, because you just delete the edge. Well, you delete the edge and you have to argue there aren't any other graphs. But if the edge UV is not present, then in fact you can verify that there are no subgraphs. Okay? So now we've come up with a graph where we can compute the values of these polynomials explicitly. So let's try to define an annealing algorithm. So we start with lambda very close to 0. And in each iteration, we're going to increase lambda by some bounded amount, okay, and recompute the values of these polynomials. So assume that we have a very good approximation to these weights when lambda is small, close to 0. Okay. Now, because of the way we define these polynomials, these are bounded degree polynomials. Okay, and therefore, a close approximation to W of I implies some constant factor approximation to the next weight w at lambda I plus 1, because we changed lambda only by some bounded amount. Okay, is this clear? Okay. We now use the constant factor approximation to run the Markov chain which we defined with respect to those weights. Okay. And it turns out that you can use samples from the Markov chain itself to boost the approximation of Wi plus 1. This is not obvious, but...
so are you going to show us how to do that, how to get from the 2 approximation to the 1, or at least that it would make it better?
I could show you, but we'll save it for perhaps the end of the talk. So maybe you can just believe that for now. Okay. So, so assume that we can do some sampling and boost this approximation. And now we just repeat the algorithm. We now have a 1 plus epsilon approximation to Wi plus 1. So just keep increasing lambda and go ahead. So, okay, there are a few things I sort of glossed over. One is that we're starting the algorithm with lambda very tiny. Okay? So how does this affect the evaluations of the polynomials? Well, it's okay, because we're only asking for an approximation to the polynomials to start with. So when lambda is very close to 0, p of lambda is approximated by its first coefficient, which we know is 1. And nuv of lambda is approximated by its first coefficient, which we know is either 1 or 0. So therefore, in our algorithm, this initial approximation is just given by 1 or 0, whatever the case may be. So are we done? Have we managed to define an annealing algorithm which starts at some easy instance and gradually moves to the complete graph? So the answer is no, because we cheated. Remember that we said that nuv of lambda takes the value either 0 or 1. The reason it does that is because the first coefficient is either 0 or 1. But it could be that nuv of lambda is not identically 0. In other words, there's some coefficient which is non-zero. Okay, so let's go back to the polynomials. Yeah, so if you look at the polynomial, we said that the first coefficient is either 1 or 0. But it could be that as a polynomial, it's not identically 0. There's some coefficient which is non-zero. And therefore, as you change lambda from 0 to 1, you had better get a good approximation to some reasonably large value. And if you start with 0 as your approximation, then you have no way of doing that. Okay? Okay. So this is not a good enough approximation for us, and we need to revise what we require of the easy graph. So instead, let's say that for every uv where nuv of lambda is not identically 0, G-easy is a graph where the polynomial can be approximated to within a multiplicative factor. Okay? And our main result is to show that such a graph exists. Okay? So it turns out, so remember that our initial candidate for such a graph was just a graph with the degrees r and c. So the G-easy where we can approximate the polynomials multiplicatively will also be a graph with degrees r and c, but we'll construct it in a special way. So here's an algorithm to construct the graph. Given a degree sequence, you must know that there's an easy greedy algorithm for constructing a graph with the required degree sequence. We sort the vertices by degree and match the highest degree vertex on the left to the d highest degree vertices on the right. We compute a residual sequence and we recurse. Okay? And this algorithm will succeed if and only if the sequence is feasible, that there is a graph corresponding to the sequence. So our algorithm uses a small twist to this, and I'll try to explain it in the picture. So as usual, we sort the vertices on the left according to degree. And on the right, we define a total ordering on the vertices, okay, called pi up here. And the total ordering respects the degree. So a vertex comes earlier in the ordering if its degree is larger. And now the iteration of the algorithm matches the highest degree vertex to the vertices, to the d vertices which are ordered highest. Okay? Next, we recompute the residual sequence. And now we need to redefine the ordering on the remaining sequence. And the new ordering has the property that it respects the degree, but moreover, it breaks ties among vertices which have the same degree by the ordering in the previous round. Okay? So to illustrate, this vertex of degree 3 in the next round is first matched to the highest degree vertex, and then it's matched to these two vertices because they came earlier in the previous ordering. Okay? So, and the algorithm continues in this way. And the theorem is that we can obtain a 1 plus epsilon approximation to the polynomial nuv of lambda for the graph which is computed by this algorithm in polynomial time. So the combinatorial fact which allows us to do this is as follows. If uv is a feasible deficient sequence, that is, there is a graph corresponding to this sequence rucv, then there's a short alternating path from u to v in the graph constructed by this algorithm. And I'll explain what that means. And then I'll try to get into why this lemma implies that we can approximate the polynomial.
Will u and v are any pair of vertices?
U and v are any pair of vertices such that this sequence is feasible. In other words, the polynomial nuv of lambda is not identically 0. So suppose that this is the graph constructed by the greedy algorithm. An alternating path is a path from u to v, which alternates in edges and non-edges of the underlying graph. And it starts and ends with an edge. Okay? Now, what happens if along the path we delete every edge and add in the non-edges of the graph? We obtain a graph which is deficient at u and v. Okay? So look at this orange path. The solid edges are in the graph and the dotted ones are not. Mm-hmm. We delete the solid edges from the graph and add in the dotted edges, which are non-edges of the underlying graph. And we obtain this graph which is deficient at u and v, because we only decrease the degree at u and v. Now, why does the existence, so I'm going to explain why the existence of short alternating paths implies that we can approximate the polynomial. Okay? So recall that this was our polynomial. And I claim that an alternating path of length 5 implies that one of the first 3 coefficients must be positive. So for example, here we had a path of length 5. And when we switch edges along it, we obtained a graph with degree sequence ru and cv. But also notice that it contains exactly 2 non-edges of the underlying graph. Okay? And therefore, it must be that the coefficient n2 is positive. And you can similarly argue that if there are paths of shorter lengths, then one of these coefficients must be non-zero. Okay? So now the idea of the approximation is simple. We want to approximate this polynomial, so we just truncate it beyond the point which we know it's non-zero. Okay? So we're going to set our approximation to be the first 3 terms of the polynomial. And since we're sure that one of these 3 coefficients is positive, we know that this takes a value of at least lambda squared. Okay? And this gives us a 1 plus epsilon approximation to nuv of lambda, because you can show that the truncated portion of the sequence can be bounded by something like epsilon times lambda squared.
Now, why did you only why did you only include the first 3 terms? Could you have gotten any more mileage?
By 3
Oh,
it's
because the alternating paths, yes, okay.
In fact, the smaller it is, sort of the better for us, though this doesn't enter into the running time at all.
So I still don't quite, I mean, if lambda is small, I see why it's a good thing, but if lambda is sort of near 1, how the heck are you able to bound
So-
the remainder by epsilon?
So that is the annealing algorithm. The point of the annealing is that we only need to have a good approximation when lambda is small. So if you remember how the annealing algorithm worked,
Oh, you're still in your near lambda equals 0, yeah.
so we start, So we start with lambda close to 0. We have a very good approximation. This is a constant factor approximation for a slightly bigger lambda. Run the Markov chain with that approximation and boost it so that you get a good approximation for the next lambda. And now just run this algorithm all over again.
So the only problem which could happen is at the beginning.
Yes, exactly. It's the beginning that we have to know how to solve. Okay. So hopefully it's clear why this lemma implies why short alternating paths imply that we can approximate the polynomial.
So each of these squiggly n sub j will take a polynomial in j to calculate.
Exactly. And the
That's
point
why
is
you need to fix the first few, otherwise you get something
exactly.
super polynomial.
Yes. So I didn't mention that we can actually compute this approximation in polynomial time, because if we want to explicitly compute what these coefficients are, it's just the number of graphs which differ from a certain graph in a few edges. So we just enumerate it, and in polynomial time we're done, as long as this is constant.
If you have the first 3 terms, you can approximate the whole polynomial exactly. I mean, with 1 to substituent.
Correct.
Well,
It's just that
since lambda is
Since lambda is very
and
tiny.
so that isn't dependent on the ratio of the terms at the very end, or
No, so we've taken the value of lambda to be so this bound here is the total number of possible tables. It's an upper bound on that. So of course they'll just be absorbed.
So you haven't shown us yet why there is an alternating path for French smaller.
No, I haven't. So I'm going to get to that next, and I won't show you the whole proof, but let me show you some simple cases, and I'm happy to show you the more difficult ones offline if you're curious. So the proof of this is by induction on the number of vertices on the left that the algorithm matches. So let's look at this case. The base case is easy, you can verify. So assume that there's more than one vertex on the left which the algorithm matches, and suppose it matches them in the order a1 through an. Okay? Let y be this box, the set of neighbors of the first vertex which is matched by the greedy algorithm. Suppose in the first case that the vertex u is the first vertex which is matched. Now there are two cases. Either v is a neighbor of it, in which case there's a path of length 1. Okay? In the other case, v is outside it, outside the neighborhood of u. But this means that v must be matched to some vertex later by the algorithm. And because the algorithm matches the vertices on the left by degree, it must be that the degree of u is less than or equal to the degree of u prime is less than or equal to the degree of u. Okay? But this implies that there must be a neighbor of u, which is a non-neighbor of u prime. Otherwise, its degree would be larger, since we know it's already matched to this. Okay? And this gives us an alternating path of length 3. Okay? Is that?
And you're saying that no matter how complicated the example is, you get an alternate. So you only have to go kind of from one side to the other twice, basically.
Yeah.
No matter what the example
Yes.
is.
What the example is, you mean what the degree sequence is.
What the degree sequence is.
Case, only for A1. Only when U is A1.
Where u is.
Right. This is the case
This
when.
is the simplest
Yes,
case.
yes, yes. But I'm saying that in the your lemma says.
But we're not yet.
Right. I understand, but what I'm saying is that what it would have to be
Yeah.
is that you only have to go back and forth
Yes.
between the sides of the bipartite graph twice to get that 5, and so you're saying no matter what you're doing, you're
Yes.
never going to have to go back and forth more than twice.
Yes.
I know, I'm just asking, is that really true? That's kind of surprising to me.
And here you haven't used yet the fact that you break ties.
Right, not yet. Yeah. So another reasonably simple case is the following. So suppose U is now matched after A1, the first vertex, and consider what happens when the greedy algorithm puts these edges in. So now what will happen is you'll compute a residual sequence on the vertices in this box, okay, because this has been matched. And let's assume that U and V are in fact feasible deficiencies for this reduced degree sequence, R prime, C prime. Okay? Now in this case, you can argue by induction, because the graph which is constructed by the greedy algorithm on the remainder certainly is a subgraph of the graph constructed by greedy on all the vertices. But by induction, we know that if U and V are feasible for these reduced degree sequences, then in fact there must be a alternating path of length 5 or less in the graph in the box. And we can use this same path, okay? Because when these edges are added, it doesn't really do anything to mess up the path. Okay, so the difficult case is when U and V are infeasible deficiencies. And if I have time, maybe I'll try to go into that later. But yeah, this maybe gives you a flavor of how you prove this. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about when these algorithms, when these annealing-based algorithms can be slow, can converge slowly. So suppose our problem is, sorry.
Are you sure that, is this lemma could be true also if you build the graph differently, or it's clear that if you don't break ties according to the way we define,
for example, if you break ties arbitrarily, then you can come up with graphs where the lemma is not true. But I would suspect that if you fix an ordering in the beginning, then always break ties according to this order, then it should be true. But it's not as easy to prove, because it's very easy to apply the induction if you define it by the previous round. But there are certainly tie-breaking rules for which it's not true. So okay, so coming to slow mixing, suppose that our problem is to sample from a distribution with many modes of this kind. So such distributions arise often in models that come from statistical physics. So the Ising model, which you might be familiar with, is defined on an underlying graph, G, and configurations assign a spin of plus or minus to the vertices of the graph. The distribution on configurations is parametrized by positive inverse temperature, and it's proportional to e to the minus beta times this Hamiltonian. And the Hamiltonian essentially measures how many edges there are whose endpoints are colored differently. Okay? So when beta is a large positive number, what we are saying is that we prefer edges to be colored monochromatically. Okay? And it was shown that for generalization of the Ising model to more states, that local Markov chains which change spins one at a time will be slowly mixing. So what I want to talk about is how tempering can possibly help overcome this slow mixing. So tempering was defined by Marinari and Parisi, and here is sort of the idea. So here is the temperature at which the distribution is bimodal, and it's hard to sample from. We define m different temperatures ranging from 0 to beta m, and here I've defined them to vary linearly. And at each temperature, this is the corresponding distribution. Okay. Now the state space of the simulated tempering chain is now a product of the original state space along this line and one of the m+1 temperatures, so denoted sort of by this green dot. And we define the transitions of the Markov chain so that, in fact, we converge with equal likelihood to each of these temperatures. Okay? So if there's some polynomial number of temperatures, we would expect to see the interesting temperature some good fraction of the time. Now, the moves of the Markov chain are of two types. In one case, we do a random a walk at a fixed temperature on the configurations. In the other case, we randomly change the temperature up or down. Okay? And the hope is that by walking around on this aggregated state space, perhaps you might be able to cross over from one mode to the other by going to a fairly high temperature. Okay? So Geyer and Thompson showed some experimental results where they found that for the problem of ancestral inference, these samplers work quickly. Madras and Zheng showed theoretical results where they showed that for the ferromagnetic Ising model on the complete graph, simulated tempering will mix quickly. So we looked at the behavior of simulated tempering for the three-state ferromagnetic Potts model and found that it was slowly mixing. And so let me try to give you a high-level idea of what happens. So we're going to show the slow mixing by bounding the conductance of the state space of the chain. The conductance is just you can think of it as the expansion of the set. It's the ratio of the capacity of the edges leaving the set to the stationary distribution of the set. And the conductance essentially characterizes the mixing time. So to show a lower bound on the mixing time, we'll show an upper bound on the conductance. So the theorem is that there's a temperature at which the Potts model on the complete graph will mix slowly. So it's useful to think of the configurations of the Potts model as equivalency classes based on the number of red, blue, and green vertices. Okay? So that's denoted by this simplex here. And you can show essentially that in order to bound the conductance on the whole, it's enough to bound the conductance on this pink region where the number of red vertices dominates. And using symmetry further, we can restrict our attention to this yellow line where the number of red and blue vertices is the same. Okay? So here I've denoted the yellow line and sort of what the distribution looks like parameterized by the number of red vertices. So the idea for bounding the conductance is just the following. So at the low temperature, at beta critical, there are two modes. One corresponds to the number of red vertices being n over 3. So the red, blue, and green vertices being of equal numbers. The other one corresponds to states where the Hamiltonian term contributes a large factor. Okay? And as we increase the temperature, there's a point, say at n over 2, at about n over 2, where the energy term isn't high enough to overcome this mode, okay? But its entropy is certainly much lower than this side. So it tends to stay low throughout. And you can sort of ignore the computation on the side, but essentially the idea is to take the cut which separates the mode corresponding to all the vertices being, to the number of red, blue, and green vertices being the same. And the thing to take away from this also is that if we define these interpolating distributions as we did, parameterized by temperature, then in fact this cut will always remain, and simulated tempering will not succeed in this case. Okay? So here is one possible idea where we'll show that on the region of the space that was colored pink, where the number of red vertices dominates, you can in fact define the tempering algorithm to show that it converges quickly. So the idea is that we can modify more than just the temperature, and we'd like to choose our interpolating distribution so that the cut is not preserved. So here I've drawn again what happens if the interpolating distributions are defined by temperature. This is the stationary probability of a configuration sigma at the ith temperature. And the observation is that we can do more than define the distribution than just to vary with temperature. We could possibly prefix it with some function, okay, so that the interpolating distributions look different. So here's a possible function. Let's say we pre-multiply by an entropy-like term. So notice that at the highest temperature, this will just evaluate to 1, and we'll get back exactly the distribution that we're interested in sampling from. Whereas when we look at the higher temperatures, the entropy term is somehow dampened, right? And so the cut is not preserved. So perhaps this is not it's not always possible to see what kind of dampening you can do in general, but it at least gives the idea that you're not restricted to just modifying the temperature. Okay, so lastly, I just want to quickly go over some applications that I've been working on and some open problems. So some open problems that are interesting. For example, can we extend annealing algorithms to work for perfect matchings in general graphs? Can we extend the algorithm to work for integer contingency tables where the entries of the matrix are integers? This problem is solved in some special cases, but in general it's not known. A more tractable problem might be, can we generate non-bipartite graphs with a given degree sequence? Again, this is known in the case that the underlying degree sequence is regular, but not in general. And one long-standing open problem which seems very easy, but its convergence properties are not known, is sampling from binary contingency tables where the moves of the Markov chain are just to switch two edges like this. Okay. So
So that people must have tried that, right? Because that's like a really
certainly. I think what I want to say is, can we use some of the ideas from annealing to try to say something about this problem? So in some recent work with Greenberg and Randall, we showed that a very natural Markov chain for generating random stable marriages mixes slowly. And this turned out actually to have connections to many other problems. So Dyer et al. And Goldberg and Jerem showed that there's a large class of problems in sharp P which are F-pras interreducible. So getting an F-pras for one implies an F-pras for all the others. These include some very interesting problems like independent sets of a bipartite graph or counting anti-chains in a poset. And counting the number of stable marriages is also equivalent to these. So so in that light, this result is sort of expected. And interestingly, neither an F-pras nor any kind of hardness is known for any of these problems. So it would be very interesting to say something about that.
So by general ferromagnetic, there is the Sinclair-Jerome method for the ferromagnetic.
Right. So in that case, I believe that the magnetic field is taken to be uniform. And this includes the case where the magnetic field can be non-uniform as well as the interaction energies. And lastly, I just wanted to describe a quick application to a problem coming from biology. So Durrett defined a Markov chain which is supposed to model how genomes rearrange themselves. So you can think of it as a card shuffling problem where I take my deck of cards and I divide it into k piles. Okay? And then the moves of the Markov chain are to cut the deck at two positions and then switch the tops of the decks. Okay? And we were able to give tight bounds on the spectral gap of this process. And I'd just like to end by saying that there are many interesting problems coming up from biology which I think Markov chain methods can shed some light on. And thanks.
Oh, wow, you managed to do that.
try to see some of the theoretical proofs.
Okay.
So for example, this lemma you finished when I became interested.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, for that contingency, I have the slides. Okay. So we said the base case is easy. The case when U is the first vertex matched is easy. Here is the inductive step. Now suppose that U and V are in fact infeasible deficiencies for the reduced sequences. Okay. So then we can show that the graph has certain structure which allows us to construct the alternating paths. So I'm going to show 3 facts which are true if this is satisfied, and I'll show you how to construct the path given these facts. Then I can show you a little bit about the proof of the facts themselves. So the first fact is that the vertex V must occur in the set of neighbors of A1, okay? And there exists a vertex W outside of this neighborhood such that the degree of the vertices V as well as W is exactly 1. Okay? If this is not true, then in fact U and V will be feasible deficiencies for the reduced sequence, and we assume that they were not. Okay? So this is the first fact.
So this graph you're showing here, that's already the reduced one, the
No.
O prime C prime graph?
No, these edges are put in by Greedy in the first iteration, and what this graph is showing is the ordering of the vertices in the first iteration.
Also, but the facts, do they refer to the reduced graph or not?
No, the facts refer, so Y is a set which is defined by the first iteration of the algorithm. It's the set which the vertex A1 is matched to. Okay? And this degree, where did it go? This degree is defined by the original degree sequence. Okay, the second fact is that the neighborhood...
Yeah, this is, he's bringing you a new...
Oh, okay. Oh, that's all right, thank you. So the second fact is that the neighborhood of U must in fact be contained inside this box. This is easy to see. If not, and suppose U has this neighbor Z, okay, well then Z is a non-neighbor of A1, and V is contained in the box by the first fact, okay, and therefore we have a path of length 3. Okay, so this was easy. The third fact is the following. When the greedy algorithm, so the
why is Z a neighbor? Oh, it's a non-neighbor of A1.
Right, because it's a non-neighbor of A1, yeah. So the third fact is the following. So consider when the greedy algorithm is matching vertices on the left, it matches A1, at some point later it matches U. Now I claim that when the greedy algorithm has matched U, then there exists a vertex B, okay, whose residual degree at that point is still 1. Okay? And if this is true, this will imply that there's a vertex X which B has to be matched to after U. Okay? Now if this fact is not true, then you can show that U and V will be infeasible for the original sequence RC. And that is contrary to the assumption of the lemma itself. Okay? So how do we put these facts together? So here is the alternating path of length 5. We start at V. Okay? V by the first fact is in the box, and therefore it's a neighbor of A1. Okay? We know there exists a B which is outside of Y. Okay? So B is a non-neighbor of A1. By fact 3, its residual degree is 1 when the vertex U was matched, and therefore it must be matched to X, which comes later than U. Okay? So it's matched here by an edge. And now, because X comes after U in the order, its degree is less than or equal to the degree of U. Okay? And so just as we argued in one of the easy cases, there must be a neighbor of U, which is a non-neighbor of X. Okay.
Wait. So if there was a neighbor of U, can you explain that to me again? I know you
Yeah.
did it in the easy.
Yeah.
case.
Okay. So the degree of x is less than or equal to the degree of u. So let's look at all the neighbors of u. In this case, there's just one. Okay. Now x is already matched here. So if it were matched to every neighbor of u, its degree would be one more, which isn't true, right? So therefore, it must have a non-neighbor to a neighbor of u.
How do we know that this neighbor is in the box?
Because by the second fact, the neighborhood of u is inside the box. Right? Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And in fact one, did you explain why V has to be in the box? Because
No,
I missed
no.
that.
I just stated the facts, and I'm going to try to explain the reason next. Okay, so we agree that if these facts are true, then we can construct a path of length 5. Okay? So, and fact 2 we already saw was true. So let's look at fact 1. So I'm going to try to just show that V must be inside the box. Okay? So suppose not, and V is outside the box here. Okay? Let's consider the greedy algorithm, which runs on R, C, and some ordering. Okay? And we'll compare it to the following running of the greedy algorithm. We look at the reduced sequence. So we subtract 1 from the degrees of u and v. Okay? And when we do that, then u will go somewhere up in the order, go behind in the order. Similarly, v will go behind in the order. Now, if v was not in the box y, okay, then in both of these instances of the greedy algorithm, okay, A1 is matched to exactly the same set of vertices. Okay? Because these vertices will remain highest in the order. Okay? Now, if the set of vertices is exactly the same, consider what happens in the next iteration of both these algorithms. Okay? So here, we're going to subtract 1 degree from each of these vertices, and we're going to be left with the degree sequence RU CV with 1 subtracted from these vertices. Okay? But that means that in fact U and V are feasible deficiencies for this reduced degree sequence. Okay? Because the reduced degree sequence is gotten by simply subtracting 1 from each of these. So it's exactly the same sequence that we get in the next iteration of the algorithm. Okay? And you can similarly show that if these facts are not true, then in fact the neighborhood of A1 will be the same, and you can argue in a similar way. Okay? So, okay. So this was the first fact. We moved to the third fact, which was that when U is matched, then in fact there's a vertex B, which is outside of the set, the box, and it has residual degree 1. Okay? So suppose this is not true. And in fact, there's no such vertex. All right? So if that, so suppose that that is not true. Now we know by this fact that in fact there does exist some vertex outside of the box, which has degree 1. So therefore, initially there are some vertices outside here. Now B is one of them, and B must be matched to a vertex which was matched earlier than U, because it doesn't have any residual degree when U is matched. Okay? So now again we consider two instances of the algorithm. One is on RC and this ordering pi. The other is on the reduced sequence where we subtract 1 from U and V. Okay? And we define the following ordering on these vertices. We switch the positions of B and V. Okay? And notice that certainly this ordering is consistent with this sequence CV in the sense that it respects the degrees. Okay? Because V will turn out to have degree 0. Okay? And B has degree 1. Okay? So V certainly must come later than all the other vertices. And now consider what happens when we run these two algorithms. So in the first iteration, A1 is matched to the vertices in this box, and A1 here will be matched to the vertices in this box. So the algorithms essentially will proceed the same way with B substituted for V. Whenever you do something with V here, you do the same with B here. But now there'll be a point when this vertex will try to match to B. But in this iteration of the algorithm, you'll try to match this vertex to V, whose degree has become 0. And so it will fail. In other words, the reduced degree sequence RUCV is in fact not feasible, okay? Contrary to the assumption of the lemma. And this, so this completes that.
So why would it try to match to B? Why not to some other vertex? B did maybe B replaced to B, but maybe there was some cyclic replacement. There was maybe some other vertex C that came in between.
Well, the ordering on the remaining vertices is exactly the same.
If you reduce the degree of B, you might force it to jump to a completely different location.
So you would force it to jump to this.
Not necessarily the same location that B was in.
I see what you're saying.
May jump even higher.
Okay, yeah. So I kind of glossed over this, and the point is that we assume that B is the last vertex of residual degree when U is matched, and therefore, in fact, B would, in fact, take the same position as B.
Oh, it's like this one. There's also
A last one.
Exactly.
And yeah, for the last one. That's good.
So she also
That's
uses
very
the
good.
literal
It was good that he got that. Okay.
In the simulated tempering, when you modify the chain with those entropy factors, can you show once more what those factors are? Can you compute them efficiently?
So for the complete graph, you can compute it efficiently, but in general, it's not clear. So.
And is there some physical meaning maybe to that?
Well, I guess in this case, what I thought was that you were sort of dampening the entropy at kind of a similar rate as the rest of the distribution for the vertices which have an equal number, for the configurations where there are an equal number of red, blue, and green.
Is there some physical process that you could say that this is sort of the analog of that? Raising the temperature, that was the old one. Here you raise the temperature, but do something with the pressure.
Could it be some kind of fugacity or something for the different particles that you're changing? I mean, if you go to the, I don't know how much statistical physics you know, but if you go to the grand canonical ensemble, then you can, in a sense, play with the entropy terms by putting in fugacities that'll give you more or less of different things. I usually look at the canonical ensemble where the number of particles of each type is fixed, but there's something above that.
I see.
Called grand canonical ensemble, where you not only can play with the energies, but you can play with the entropies. So she may be. I can't figure out exactly how, but you may want to think about whether you're essentially.
Because that would mean diluting your model. So now you would allow signs where you sort of don't have spins in. Now you create some dissonance.
And did you prove, for this case, did you prove that it really does speed up on the complete graph?
Yes. So the proof is you can decompose. This. So the proof is by decomposition, and essentially what you say is you put one restriction. You divide the space into half along the middle, right? And then essentially you're doing a random walk within one mode or the other, and the projection will look like you can either, so at each temperature you can either go left or right, and you can move up and down on the temperatures, and essentially you can do
You can lift the rapid mixing back to the original space.
So you can lift it back to the pink portion of the space. So you can lift it, yes, you can show that destroying this cut destroys the cut in this pink region. where the number of red vertices is dominating.
But then, can you deduce from that overall?
No, from overall you can't deduce from that because the modes here will still remain. In each of these, the modes will still remain. So in fact, that's one problem. Suppose you have this trimodal kind of distribution, then can you show that this kind of dampening still works?
Well, it's an interest. I mean, it's not that you can't. It's just an interesting
The way
problem.
you multiply, you seem to be multiplying by something which doesn't really depend on the colors, right?
Right, that's true. Yes.
So, could you try to do your decomposition? I mean, nobody says that your decomposition, your factor decomposition has to be linear. So could you maybe define sort of a chain in the... So rather than walking up and down, right, you walk in this big space, cross the temperature. And now sort of say that you do vector spaces with respect to the temperature. I wonder whether how it just goes through with you with a lot of, I mean, it sort of will be uglier to write down.
So you are saying that we decompose the configurations. So the thing is that, I mean, you're not even connected within the restrictions, right? So if I look at the configurations where the number of, red, blue, and green vertices are the same, you're not connected really on that space. So I'm not sure how you can decompose it in this way and try to show the mixing.
Maybe we should take this offline to,
Maybe
Mark.
to sort of solve a problem you couldn't solve just in a question and answer.
Yeah, so you can discuss this with us and with you all in our meetings. Any more questions for tonight?